It's also a matter of microdosing adversity. Like, of
Yes.
course, yeah, like, of course things are going to feel hard the first time you go through it.
Alena, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to chat today.
Me too. I would love for you to start at the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey.
So I am very fortunate that I grew up with two parents that were very passionate about what they did. So my dad was a longtime teacher and coach and educator, and my mom was actually and is still currently an entrepreneur. So I'm fortunate that from a young age, I knew it was a possibility to be my own boss and go down my own path that maybe wasn't traditional. And I think that's really cool. And as I reflect on, before hopping on here, I was kind of reflecting on my entrepreneurial journey. And I'm like, it actually kind of started pretty early because I had that example that I was like, wherever I end up, I feel like eventually I'll want to start my own business. And so to kind of then fast forward a little bit to when Training to Excel started, it started in November of 2015. And I had already been several years into my strength and conditioning journey. So I had already been coaching for several years. And I was at a place in my career where I loved what I was doing. I was a collegiate strength coach and I loved working with my athletes. But I was noticing that there were certain gaps and certain voids. And it actually stemmed from athletes as they were about to graduate saying, Alena, I don't know what to do in the gym. Will you write me a program? And I remember sharing this with my mom and she was like, well, why don't you register yourself as a business and you can create some legitimacy? Because it wasn't part of my job title. So this was kind of like after the athletes had graduated. And I thought, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Like that's a good idea. And that I think, that definitely sparked Training to Excel, and that's how it initially started. But it ended up being just a really fun outlet for me to share my journey as a young strength conditioning coach, especially as a young woman in the field. I felt like I had, and still do a unique perspective to share in that sense. And I just kind of started exploring. Like I built a website and I had a blog and I started creating ebooks. And then at some point I started the Instagram account, and it was all just very much like, this is fun to do on the side. I love being a collegiate strength coach. I then did my master's. I was like applying to all these different jobs. And then it was in the summer of 2017, right after I finished grad school. And my dad really suddenly passed away. Obviously, that's not something you plan for. And obviously, when you go through a big loss like that, it really forces you to reflect and reevaluate. Right. What are you doing? Are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you passionate about what you're doing? And at the time, I had just accepted a role at a different university. And though I was still very happy working in the collegiate sector, I remember having a moment where I was alone in the weight room one day and I literally said out loud, I'm like, I'm capable of more than this. And I think there were certain sides of me that I was kind of putting on the back burner, or certain passions of mine or things I wanted to explore, because I just kept saying, when I run my own business, when I'm 40, when I have more experience, when I have more letters beside my name, I have to do all of these things before I become an entrepreneur. And throughout that year, obviously, like the grief journey is not linear, and I, still struggle with it for sure. But I think one thing it taught me was life is too short and I need to trust myself and I need to take a chance on myself. And so when my contract ended the following year, I made the decision. It was a continuing contract, but I decided to resign from the position and just give myself a shot. I said, I'll give myself a year. And if I don't love it, if this isn't the path I want to be on right now, I will explore other options back in kind of the collegiate sector of strength and conditioning. And I'm happy to say that was April of 2018. And as we sit here and chat, it's September of 2024. So
that's amazing.
Yeah.
I love your journey because I think what's cool about it is I think a lot of people have this idea where they're like, okay, well, I now decide that I want to be an entrepreneur. I have to just now quit my job and like jump head first into this journey. Whereas I think for you, what was really cool is like, you did have the experience of knowing that that is a viable option in the first place because of your family. And then organically over time, you were like expanding and branching out. And so like, then when you finally realize, what am I waiting for? I have all of these things already built. It was a much easier transition, especially because I assume you had a lot of connections already and you kind of had like a general idea of what you wanted to do with the business, right?
Yeah, and I'm actually so happy that you mentioned that because I just had this conversation with a coach that I mentor. We literally talked about it yesterday. And I said that it's kind of supposed to be messy before you make the decision. And I think that's something that gets lost on social media. I believe in the universe. I believe in the energy and whatever. But I also don't think it's realistic for us to be like, I'm just going to quit everything and the universe will bless me. No, because to be a functioning human in our world, like we cannot just be like, oh, whatever, like my rent will pay itself and like groceries will pay itself. Like,
no, truly.
It has to be like, it has to be part of your decision to be like, am I secure financially? Do I have support from people around me? Like, I don't think, I just think sometimes on social media, and I was getting caught up in it when I was younger, being like, oh yeah, maybe I just leave. And it's like, well, but no, because I'm someone that I like to be prepared and I like to feel, you know, like I have a plan. And yeah, you don't have to have everything figured out, but I also think it's important that you be patient with the decision, and you could be very sure of the decision and it could be a process to get there. So it could be like, maybe you really think about it in the summer, you start to line things up and you say by December 1st at the end of this year, you know, that's when I'll fully go on my own. But I think it's important that people have a bit of a plan at least, instead of just being like, I'll figure it out. And some people operate better that way. That's not how I operate, so that's not my vibe.
But I think like also with the universe, I think timing is a huge thing. And like timing will always manifest itself, and like everything happens for a reason and works according to like some sort of timeline that we don't have a general understanding of or have access to. And so I think a lot of the times people force the jump. They're like, okay, I have this idea, I'm going to do it. And it's like, that is an option. And I tried it that way. I started this podcast when I was unemployed, and I was like, girl, this is going to be my ticket out of corporate life. And then I slowly realized that like freelance is so hard. And for me, and the lifestyle that I want to live, like that is not going to work. I want to be able to buy my friends' birthday gifts. I want to be able to go on girls' trips. Like those things are part of my lifestyle, and working freelance, that simply was not going to be the case. That might not be the case for another entrepreneur, but the point of what I'm trying to say here is like, pay attention to the timing. I think for your case, it made sense. Like you had built all of these things. You had a great foundation to jump to already. And then you had like that basically what I would consider to be like almost divine clarity, where you're like, what am I doing? I can do so much more. I've already built more. So like the time was there for you to make the next jump.
Well, it's interesting you talk about timing, because right before my dad had his heart attack, literally like days before it, I had accepted a role at this university. And if I'm being honest, when I first interviewed for the role, I was just like, I had just finished my master's. I was kind of putting resumes out everywhere. And I remember calling my dad after the interview, and he was asking how it was going. I said, it went really well, but I actually don't think I really see myself here. But, it was great experience, and I loved the people that I met. And who knows, like, never say never sort of thing. And for whatever reason, I decided to say yes to the role. And after everything happened, I was like, I am so grateful that I have a stable job to go to. And yes, it was a lot of effort. And yes, it was very challenging. My first day was 3 days after my dad's funeral. But had I not had that, I don't think I would have had the discipline and the drive to build everything on my own. And when I reflect back on that summer, I had come back, and normally in the summers, I would work at different training facilities. And that summer I didn't, because I had stayed to help with the football team, and there were all these things, but I had a handful of athletes that followed me. So I found a space in my hometown. I rented the space, And then the gears started turning. I was like, oh, like I could do this. But then when everything happened, I was like, the last thing I want to do is schedule and plan and execute. Whereas like I was able to go, and yes, I still had to work hard, and I still had to, coach and put my best foot forward, but it's not like I was planning everything. Like I was working with another coach. I was working in the athletics department, and I'm so grateful I had that time. And then it was in that time where just the way our schedule was set up, there was a lot of quiet time in the weight room, which when I was coaching, I loved it. When I was with the athletes, I loved it. But then when I'm supervising an empty weight room, that's when I'm like, I think I can be using this time differently. And that's when I literally was like, I'm going to build some ebooks. I'm going to write programs. I'm going to post on my blog. I'm going to post on social media. And all of a sudden it was like, and then it got messy where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like training people before I went to campus. And then at night I would go to an event or I'd do all these things. And I'm like, okay, at some point I have to choose one or the other. But it felt good to get to that place because I'm like, I know I have things to like fill my time with.
Yeah, no, I totally relate. And this is something that I've always been really curious about is like, when do we make the decision to make the jump for real? Like, when is it time to say, I have to let go of the quote unquote stable job and now transition full time to entrepreneur? Because I'm running into this where like I have my podcast, I have a full 9 to 5 job, and in my 9 to 5, like opportunity abound. Like they want me to start doing more, which is great and I love it. But at the same time, I'm also starting a tech platform. I'm a co-founder. So I'm like, oh shit. Like time is now my hot commodity.
Yeah.
I ironically took my 9 to 5 because I originally was an office manager and I was like, this is great. It's not a super high mental impact job. Like I can show up, I can fill the coffee beans, I can leave. And like and I also had some downtime during that because like obviously, and the company I work at is great. I was very honest with them about like what my goals were. And the guy I interviewed with was like, don't worry, girl. Like if you want to work on that stuff after you're done with all your work, like go for it. You should. And then eventually, like over time, I started to get into marketing, and now here we are, fast forward. But I'm also starting to get to the point where it's messy. And it's like my schedule looks wild. And it's like a lot of time of me having to jump between different mental aspects of like, okay, what business am I working on right now? And my co-founder and I's timeline is January to like really start pitching to investors and like actually taking the next steps. But I too am starting to feel like it's messy. And so I'm wondering do you remember what that moment was when you were like, it's official and it's time to transition?
I mean, I think like I've gone through multiple bouts of burnout, which I absolutely do not wear as a badge of honor. I think as like millennial women, and especially growing up as an athlete, and for context, like part of why I got into strength and conditioning was I've been an athlete all my life. I played basketball and lacrosse in university. And I feel like as an athlete, you're just constantly like, I need to like earn all these things and I need to fill my schedule. And to be honest, I've just been so used to like having so much on my plate. But there are certain times, and I really started to feel that towards the end of the year when I'm like, okay, I can do this right now, but like, this is not sustainable. And then I'm not going to be good for anyone. Like, I'm not going to be a good partner to, at the time he was my boyfriend, now he's my husband. It's like, I'm not going to be a good daughter. I'm not going to be a good friend. I'm not going to be a good coach. I'm not going to be a good business owner. So it's like, at some point, I feel like you do have to make the decision to be like, what is going to, not only fulfill me in terms of joy and passion and purpose, but also like, again, the realistic side of me is also like, okay, but what can pay my bills? And like, if I take something off my plate, I really do believe that does open you up for more opportunities in either side. So maybe it's, maybe you say goodbye to your 9 to 5, and then all of a sudden with more time, you're like, oh, okay, now I can like say yes to these opportunities that before I couldn't even think about because I just sheerly didn't have the capacity. But it is hard. I will be totally honest. It is really hard to kind of like pinpoint and say like, it's this. I think it's just when you come to a realization of like, things are going to start to go south if I don't make a decision soon. Yeah. Like, I just think it's the sustainability piece. And I think we have to remind ourselves, like, this is so cliche, but it's like, you can't pour from an empty cup, but like it's true. Like you can,
Cliche for a reason.
yeah, like you could only give so much before you're like, I'm empty and now I have nothing to give in any aspect of my life. And this doesn't feel good. So,
Yeah.
And sometimes that is taking the quote unquote safer route. And what I mean by that is maybe that is staying in, you know, for my case, that unionized like university position. Maybe it is the corporate 9 to 5. It doesn't mean it's forever. You're just like, again, I think like it's a beautiful thing to take a chance and take a risk. And I just think like with the way society operates now, it's like we don't have the luxury of always being like, I'm just gonna do whatever and see what happens. It's like we have to be responsible.
Yeah, and I am definitely a big believer in people following their passions.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I talk to somebody who's unhappy with their current lives or roles at work, I'm always the first to encourage them to take a leap and to try something different and like pursue something that genuinely brings them fulfillment and joy. But I'm also not going to suggest somebody just like blow up their whole lives for no reason. And because that's crazy. Like, you're right. We were adults here.
Yeah.
Like, let's make choices.
Yeah.
But there's making a smart choice and making a choice that is aligned. Those two things to me are not mutually exclusive. Like they can run concurrently.
Absolutely. And I also think it's like, actually one of the conversations I had with one of the coaches is she said that her partner had kind of said like, I'm, you know, he had just gotten, you know, a new role and he was like, I want to support you in this transition. So if it means like, and I told her, I was like, that is amazing. Like big props to your partner. That's fantastic that you have that support. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but maybe it is asking for help. Like maybe it is saying to a partner, a friend, a sibling, a parent, hey, like, I really believe that this is the right choice for me, but I feel like the next 3 months is, you know, might not be as stable as I would have hoped. And I just want to ask for help in this time. And if you can support me, like you know, if I need help, I can come to you. Like there's nothing, I'm not great at asking for help. So it's actually hilarious that I'm talking about this. My husband's probably in the background being like, yeah, she totally asked for help. But I think like if I was in that position now, like I would turn to him, I would, you know, turn to my siblings, I would turn to my mom and say like, hey, like this is something I really believe in and I would love your support in it as I do this. And yeah, sometimes you go through something and it doesn't work out, but you know, you can't say that you didn't try, right? Like you at least gave it a shot. So
yeah, I think as entrepreneurs, what we tend to prioritize over everything else is trying. We very much are like, it does not matter if you fail or not. Failure is just data. It's just a learning opportunity. But for us, like the big thing is if you don't try, that is worse than trying and failing.
1000%. And I think that's exactly what was going through my mind when I was deciding to make this decision, because I think especially in collegiate strength and conditioning in Canada, there is not as many jobs as there is in the US. So like in the NCAA, there's just like more schools. So there are more positions available. So the fact that I had one of those positions, like I had a lot of people question, like, why are you doing this? Like, and to be honest, I feel like that did stop me in some ways. Like some ways I was like, oh no, I'm going to keep climbing here and maybe I'll be the head coach and all these different things. And then I was like, just as you said, I feel like I'm going to be more mad at myself if I don't try. Like if I try and it doesn't work out, as you said, like it's feedback. Like you learn either what works or what didn't work and what's not your thing. And I think about that like in my entrepreneurial journey now, like I think of different services I've tried that I'm like, this is going to be it. Like this is going to be the big ticket one. And then it's crickets when I launch it. And I'm like, great. Love that for me. Love that for me. But then it's just like, okay, but what about that? And then like I'll ask for feedback from people and be like, oh, it's the timing. And then all of a sudden I launch it at a different time in the year and it's like, it fills. And I'm like, oh, interesting. Yeah. So, you know, like, and I feel like I also got that from my athlete journey as well. Like I'm never going to go into a practice or in a game and always be perfect.
Right.
it's just not the reality. So it's like, okay, what can I learn from not being perfect? Like, what can I learn from my mistakes, and how can I grow from that? And how can I evolve as an athlete and now, as an entrepreneur?
It's so interesting. I never considered the similarities between being an athlete and being an entrepreneur, because I've heard you say it like a couple times now,
Mm-hmm.
where also I think the personality types of an athlete and an entrepreneur are very similar. And I would love for you to expand on that, because it's something I've never thought about. I would not consider myself to be an athlete, but my brother is a major athlete, like quarterback of the football team, pitcher of the baseball team. He got a full ride to go to college for football, which he didn't end up doing. In fact, he ended up pursuing a degree in entrepreneurialism, and he now owns
Oh.
his own tech platform. So I didn't put two and two together until you just said it, but I would love for you to like talk about what you think has helped you in terms of like what you've learned from being an athlete that has helped in your entrepreneurial career, and like vice versa.
Oh my gosh, I would love to talk about this because I actually just recorded my own podcast episode on the impact of sport and the lessons that I learned as an athlete that I very much use today. And I think like there's some maybe like more tactical things like managing your time wisely, because it's like as a student athlete, you're taking a full course load. You have to show up to your classes and you have to write your midterms and your exams, but you're also on the road and you have practice and you have games and you have all these different things in your schedule that you have no choice but to be organized. Because if you're not organized and you're late for a practice or you miss something, like you're done. Like you just don't have the luxury of just showing up whenever you want to. I also think the discipline piece is like following through with things and taking actions even when you like really don't want to do them. Like I think that's the biggest difference between motivation and discipline is like, yeah, motivation is great. It feels so good to feel motivated. I'm 34 and I've been playing basketball since I was like 6, and I will tell you that I absolutely did not want to go to every single practice and have a tournament every weekend. I wasn't waking up, like, of course I like loved playing, but it was the discipline that kept me doing the things that were important to do to be my very best on the court and for my teammates. And now as an entrepreneur, like, I think that discipline, like I say it's like a muscle, like you have to build it and you have to practice it and you have to just like get outside your head. And sometimes it's like thinking less. Like everyone's like, well, what do you tell yourself? I'm like, I don't tell myself anything. I actually have to shut my brain off, just like get out of bed when my alarm goes off. There's not a magic potion. It's just about being consistent and diligent. And I also think another piece is I've always been a big goal setter. So when I played specifically in university, like I had a notebook in the locker room and in my locker where I would write little goals for each game. Even practices, I'd be like, this is something that I want to do in practice. And I'm very much like a checklist girl. Like I love like highlighting things. I love checking a box. So for me, that felt really good to like after a game be able to reflect on what I had set out to do and then be able to be like, ooh, okay, I missed this one, but I think I could do this a little bit better the next game. Or like maybe I have to be more realistic with my numbers and things like that. And now I'm like, oh wow, I still do that. Like I have weekly goals and I have monthly goals, and sometimes you can't get too wrapped up in those, but I just think there's so many things that I did as an athlete that I now carry into my life as an entrepreneur. And if I were to kind of narrow it down, like, yes, it's the logistical stuff of being able to manage your time and like work well with others and be on a team and be accountable to other people. But I also think it's like that discipline and like building really strong habits, because nothing we do as entrepreneurs happens overnight. Like it might look like that to some people, but it's always those small steps that we take each day that like one after another over time, you look back and you're like, oh wow, I've actually like progressed. And like, there's nothing I do like, it's not like I sit down on my computer and I'm like, I just wrote a $1 million blog post that like will, like that doesn't happen. It's like the little actions, the people I talk to, the impact I make, the service I provide. It's like all those little things over time that add up. And I think you learn that as an athlete, that like there's work that has to be done in order to be successful. And I think that's a big lesson that if you weren't involved in athletics, like maybe sometimes you think it's just like one step and you're at the top of the mountain, but it's like, there's no gondola up this mountain. You actually have to hike it, and like you have to take it one step at a time.
Yeah. I think like two things. First, I think it's the overcoming the hardship of it, that, and especially I think like this is something I've talked about before, but I can only relate it really to exercise. When you are fucking tired and your lungs are on fire, your muscles are on fire, and you have to push that last 1% to empty the tank, that happens all the time as an entrepreneur, especially like for people that were in our case where you're working multiple jobs to try to get the entrepreneurial venture off the ground. I was talking to my co-founder this morning. We were both like, we are tired. And like his job is popping off. Also, like they want him to start having more responsibility. And he and I both weirdly happen to be in the exact same position on completely different sides of the planet, literally. And we were both like, this is just part of the situation. And there is such a grit that's required that not everybody has, where it's like, I know that it's so hard, but I'm going to push through anyway. And like, you get that when you exercise. And it's why I'm so passionate about making sure that entrepreneurs are working out, because you do learn such valuable skills. Like when I'm, for example, doing Pilates, or like I went to hot yoga yesterday. It was so hot in there. So many times I was like, should I just take a little shortcut? Like, should I not do like the full chaturanga? Like, should I just take a quick child's pose? Like, and every time I'm like, no, you're not going to do that. You're going to push through. It's only 60 minutes. Like, you just have to push through. And entrepreneurial like requires that. It is not an optional situation. It is like, as a personality type, you really, really need that in order to succeed.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a matter of like almost microdosing adversity. Like, of course, like, of course things are going to feel hard the first time you go through it. But then the more you go through it, the stronger you get. I mean, like, that's literally what happens with the body, right? It's like we apply a stimulus. The first week of a new program is like going to feel really hard. It's going to feel really challenging. You might feel sore. You might feel like you can't push that much weight. And then all of a sudden, you're like continuing through the program. It starts to get a little bit easier because you're being consistent with applying that stimulus. And I think it's the same thing in sport. It's the same thing in, the entrepreneurial journey is like you're microdosing those challenges. So yeah, of course, there might be like a big challenge that comes your way, but by like navigating and overcoming small challenges here and there, when the big ones come up, it doesn't feel as scary because you're like, I've been here before and I'll probably be in this situation again. So how can I navigate this in the best way possible? And I love that you said the word grit, because like the book talks about it by Angela Duckworth, talks about it being passion and perseverance. And I just think that is like such a beautiful way to see it. And it's like, I feel like grit also encompasses like the mess of it, of like, sometimes you just gotta figure it out and it's not gonna always look pretty. And you just need to like, sometimes it's just about moving through it and it's not gonna be perfect, but you're gonna do it and you're gonna learn from it and you're gonna be stronger because of it. And I also think going back to like the failure piece is like, now we see failures as steps and as feedback and as parts of the process. But for people that haven't been in those situations, it's going to feel so much bigger because it's new. Whereas like, we're like, oh, a fire we need to put out? Did this yesterday. Can do it again.
No problem. Yeah, 100%. And you're right, it is messy. And especially when it comes to starting your own business, there is ironically a plethora of information out there. But the thing is, and something that I'm learning, is that every person's journey is completely different. And there's no perfect roadmap. There's no perfect blueprint. Like, as much as I try to give that on this podcast about like, here are some things that will get you from 0 to 1, regardless of what industry you're in. At the end of the day, everyone's journey looks completely different. Like, for example, my pitch deck is going to look completely different to another tech founder's pitch deck, and that's because like our story is different. But within that, like, it's going to be a fucking mess, like, to try to figure this out, because there's no perfect right answer, and that's okay. But the beauty of it is that if you can have the discipline and the motivation and the passion to push through that, that's where magic happens.
For sure. And I think like we do live in a world where there's like so much of everything, right? Like there are so many strength and conditioning coaches like doing very similar things that I do, but like no one does it like me. And I actually don't mean that in a cocky way, because when I look at, you know, a colleague that does the same thing down the street, no one does it like them.
Yeah.
And what separates us, like sometimes I've had conversations with like business mentors and they're like, what separates you? And I'm like, I actually just think it's like my character and my personality. And that's not a, I don't mean to be vague and like, oh, it's me being myself, but it's like, let's be real. Like there's so many of us that like program in similar ways and we're offering similar services. And that's okay, because the people that come to me for a reason. And the people that go down the street go there for a reason. And I really do think that there's space for everyone. And I almost think like it gets kind of icky when people are like, what's your it factor? And it's like, no one has walked a day in my shoes. No one does it like me, just as I don't do it like them. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And sometimes like, let's not make it complex. Like, because, you know, again, people like I operate in one of the gyms that I operate out of. It's a communal space for independent contractors like myself. So there's like all these different companies. There's another company that runs a very similar small group training program to me. My people come to me for a reason. Their people go to them for a reason. I love what they do. I think it's amazing. And we're aligned on so many different things, but it's a perfect example of like, we still do things differently. And a lot of times that comes down to like the personality and the character and the beliefs and the core values and all of these things. But I think sometimes people get caught up in being like, I have to have this secret sauce and I have to solve this very specific problem. It's like, yes, I do know that's, you know, part of like marketing and sales. Like you do need to solve a problem. You can't just be like, I'm just here to hang out with everyone. Like I'm just the vibe. Yeah, I'm just the vibe. I'm just here to like make everyone feel good. But I do think sometimes like people go too far down that rabbit hole of like, I need to be so different than everyone. And it's like, but don't try to be something you're not, because then that actually will probably deter people away from you because you're not being genuine. So like, it's okay if you offer a similar service. The service isn't going to be the same coming from me as it is from the person out the street.
Yeah. And I think your approach honestly takes the pressure off, where before, and even I struggle with this sometimes, like, especially while I'm doing this pitch deck process, it's a lot of me having to explain to myself what our product does, how we differentiate ourselves. Like, I'm having to answer all these hard questions. And even I get in my own head where I'm like texting my co-founder, I'm like, wait, literally, what are we doing? How are we different? I confuse myself because I get too in the weeds. And then I have to take a step back and I have to be like, okay, now, like, the beauty of us doing things is that you're right. Every single person is unique, and our approach and our lens to our business is completely different from our competitors. And I think about it as like, the way that you explain that is simply by telling your story. Like, how did you get into this? How did you find this niche or this problem? And like, what is your solution, right? Because it's the same as, like you were saying, I think like activewear companies are a great example. There's 8 billion different activewear companies, but what I'm buying for might be completely different from what you're buying for. And also nowadays, with I think the rise of entrepreneurialism, particularly after COVID, we're much more focused on who is behind the product. Like, I personally buy into a founder. If I love you, guaranteed, frankly, I'm going to love your product. And you could have very similar offerings. And like, I'm going to go back to the activewear example. Like, I love Grace Beverly. I think she's incredible and I love her products. And I will buy them over a very similar product offering just because I I buy into what she's selling personally. And so I think when we think about it from that perspective, it takes a lot of the pressure off of having to be like, what is my differentiating factor? It's more
Yeah.
like, girl, don't worry about it. Like, it's you. You are what's different. And as long as you can articulate your story of how you created your business, like, people are going to vibe. At least the right people are going to vibe.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the other thing with the universe. Like, don't worry. You put it out there and you're passionate about it, and you like have done your due diligence about understanding and making sure that there like is a market, you know,
Mm-hmm.
even if you're the target audience, right? As long as there's a market there, the right people will come to you. You just have to be authentic in putting it out.
Absolutely. And I think in like being in a service-based industry, an exercise that I did that I highly recommend to anyone at any point in their entrepreneurial journey is Simon Sinek wrote a book, Starts with Why. And
Mm.
him and his team, he has like a massive team, they run workshops on like helping people determine their why, because I feel like especially for someone that works again in that very people facing service based industry, everyone's like, I want to help people, and I'm like, I love that, we love
Right.
that, the world needs more of that.
Yeah.
But like, why do you want to help people? Like,
Mm.
what is like the core reason? So like part of why I became a strength and conditioning coach is because in my own journey as an athlete, I saw the impact and I felt the impact of what it meant to put work in off the court. And I saw how that positively benefited me on the court. And I was like, I want to be part of an athlete's journey to help them feel that same way. Like, I want to
Mm.
be a support to them in that phase of their athletic career. And of course, like things have evolved, but like I feel like when you go a layer deeper, then like we all want to help. Every entrepreneur wants to help people. Like I could probably
Period.
speak for like all of it. Like we all want to make a difference, but it's like, why? And that's when it gets a little bit more personal. When it's like, this is what I went through and this is like what helped me. And I want other people to feel that way. And like, I want to create that impact for other people. So it's like, it's just challenging yourself to like get a layer deeper. And like, that annoying kid that's like, well, why?
Yeah.
Why? And like every question is why. And it's almost like you have to do that and just like keep writing layers. Like, I want to help people. Why? Because it feels good. Why? Because it feels good when other people have helped me in my journey. Why? Like, and you just keep answering that question. And I know that might seem annoying, but then it's like that's where the differentiating factors come. And I love what you said about, the different activewear brands. And I think, it seems like you have like the brands you buy from, like you're connected to. And like as a strength and conditioning coach, for me, and something I do in my business, I have like an education sector of my business, and I focus a lot on continuing education for coaches, trainers, and practitioners. And one of the major themes I focus on is connection and communication. And these are things that are often seen as soft skills. But I'm like, our job is pretty much like solely to connect with people. Of course, like we need to know how to write a program, and we should know how to like coach exercises and facilitate a training session. But ultimately, the impact is made in how we connect to people. And like what I've learned, even on my social media, is like I get the most engagement when it's like I'm talking or I'm sharing something, or like people feel like they're connecting to the human behind Training to Excel and not just like this like entity. And I know for some business that's not always realistic, because sometimes it is an entity and there's different people involved in it. But I think it's super cool. Like I love going to conferences where like there are these big franchise companies that we know and that are all over North America, and then all of a sudden we're hearing the founder of it speak, and I'm like, that's who's behind that? That's so cool. And then all of a sudden you feel this like deeper connection because you see the person, and a lot of times they share their like founder stories, and then you're like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. And just as you said with that one activewear brand, then you're like, I'm a customer for life.
Yeah. And I really like that exercise about the whys. I'd actually done that, but on a more personal level. Like, I think during COVID, probably like everybody else, was going through a lot of like personal development and working through my own demons and like
Mm-hmm.
trying to become a better person. And this was an exercise I would do a lot, is I was like, I was having an icky feeling, and to understand the root of where it came from and like why I was having it, I would absolutely have to do this with myself. Like, I'd be like, why am I irrationally angry at X person? And it would have to be like, why? And then it would be like, oh, finally we get to the childhood trauma to where that stemmed from. And then I could be like, oh, okay, now we can work with that.
Mm-hmm.
And then that would like help. But I never thought to put it in the context of business. But of course, with all things entrepreneurialism, like you can find inspiration within our daily lives. And I think that's a genius experience.
Yeah.
You learn this from a book, right?
So I read the book Starts With Why by Simon Sinek. And then I think it's at the back of the book, or maybe I saw on social media or something, that his team offered courses or workshops. So it was like a virtual workshop, and you just sign up for a random time, and it was a live workshop. And
Nice.
I'm not totally sure if they still do that. So maybe check out the site and report back. But we like went through, they kind of like guided us through the like why, what, or why, how, and what. So it's like why you're doing it, how you're going to do it, and then what you're going to do. I think so it was like, it's kind of like start here and then branch out. And it was like the book itself even talked about, related it to bigger companies that everyone knows. It would be like McDonald's, and like this is their why, and then this is how they do it, and then this is what they do to like explain their why, sort of thing. And when they illustrated it like that, it was so easy to connect to. It was like, whoa, yes, that makes so much sense, because they're using something that's really familiar. So I just thought it was a really cool experience to go through, and you learn a lot about yourself. And especially when, like, in my position, I am a solo entrepreneur, that like, at times I'm always trying to sometimes make Training to Excel seem like it's like that big entity and there's so many people. But I'm like, the more I have conversations with people, the more I'm like, well, maybe I should just showcase the fact that it's just me. And like, Training to Excel reflects me. Like, my core values are Training to Excel's core values. And it's like, that's what's attracting people into the business. And until I hire a team and hire other people, like, maybe I need to play into that, because that's what people connect to. And then when I start to build my community, I'm building my community of like-minded people, because sure, they're connecting to the brand, but like it's a personal brand essentially. So they're really connecting to me.
Yeah. And I think there's something to be said about, we look to these big enterprise companies to say like, oh, for some reason that's the goal. Like, to get to those big levels, that's the goal. And the more I think about it, sometimes the more I question how big I really want to be. And I think about this also in terms of social media. Like, this is how we educate people. This is how we talk about our brands. This is how we get the word out. This is how we get traction. This is how we pay our bills. And yet simultaneously, I'm always like, how big do I want to be? Because that comes with a whole other layer. And then to your point, there's such beauty in the place that you're at right now and the journey that you've been and like how much growth you've had. And to let people in also allows them to join you on your journey of growth. And like, what a fun experience it'll be to look back one day and be like, damn, like the people who are following me now get to see me hiring my first employee. Like, that's crazy. Like, no longer am I a solo entrepreneur, and that's wild. And like, what a fun experience. And to like let people in on that, I think is such a special journey. And like, it's something I'm thinking about now, about how can I share where I'm at now? Like, how can I talk about the experience that I'm going through making a pitch deck? And like, because people watch YouTube content all the time about how to make a pitch deck, but nobody, I feel like, talks about what it's like to actually be in the thick of that. And like, I was trying to like make an Instagram post last night and like trying to understand how I can articulate the experience that I'm going on right now, because I don't feel like I have the place to be able to express advice, because I don't have a lot of experience, but I can at least tell you like what I'm learning today and walk you through that and like walk you through my mindset. So then maybe later on I can give you my advice, but like, there's also no harm or no shame in saying, this is the place that I'm at right now. If you want to follow along and like watch me grow and make simultaneous mistakes, then like, come on,
But I think people are craving that now. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I think I'm kind of sick of seeing the like, look at all these amazing things I'm celebrating. And like, I shouldn't say it like that because I love seeing people win. But I think like it's very easy to get caught up in the like, oh my gosh, like I'm literally just scrolling through everyone's highlight reels and maybe I had a bad day. And again, that's like also setting boundaries and things like that. But I just love when people are like, let's keep it real. And this is actually what I went through today. And it's like, you see this, and then this is the reality. But I also think like that makes me more inclined to like support companies because I'm like, ooh, you just get to like see the back end. A company that has done an amazing job at that. They're a Canadian company, but I think that they are in quite a few stores in the US now, is Midday Squares. And they're like little protein squares. It's a brother and a sister, and then the sister's husband, I think. And they have literally vlogged like their entire journey, fights, how messy it was, mistakes, failures, branding, being like it. And they have just absolutely skyrocketed in the past like couple of years. And I think like, of course, like it's really good. Like they're really good quality ingredients and they actually taste really good. But I think the reason for their success is they have taken people on this like intimate journey and have allowed people into this like very intimate journey of theirs. And like, I just have like the most respect for them because I'm like, that is so cool. And like, that's
scary.
It's scary, but like that, I think they went into it knowing that like that was going to be their shtick. Like that was going to be what sets them apart.
Yeah.
Because
totally.
Every other like, you know, health food company is like buttoned up, and it's like you just see this perfect like aesthetic protein bar next to this beautiful latte.
Like, I'm the almond girl. Like, I'm your Pinterest fantasy, where it's like they're like, we are what the Pinterest girl's reality is.
Exactly. And I think I do think, because I've had conversations with people in my circle as well, and just talking about like influencer marketing and like all these different things that I feel like we've just been bombarded with. And I'm like, oh, the people that I love to follow are the people that are just like very real. And like I'm pretty selective with like the influencers I follow, and the ones that I do because they're so real. And and yes, they show the buttoned up and the pretty things and the wins and the successes. And they're also showing you what's like happening behind the scenes. And, you know, I think going back to what we talked about too, like being a solo entrepreneur, like one thing that I will admit I don't do enough, but I kind of want to say this out loud as a reminder to myself, but as a reminder to anyone listening too, is like, as a solo entrepreneur, it is really, really special to have an idea in your head. And this goes for any entrepreneur, to have an idea in your head and then see it come to life. Like that is such a flex that I think people like, and even people like, you know, my husband works in the corporate space, and it's really cool when he is working on a project and he sees it come to life. But he also knows that he was like part of, you know, a bigger entity. Whereas like people that are working by themselves or like in maybe a team less than 5 people, like that started in someone's head.
That is what I'm doing here.
Like, girl, that's so cool.
No, that's it. That's why. Like, this is why, is because I want to prove to myself that I'm not full of shit. I've been saying this forever, that I wanted to do this business and that I wanted to be my own boss and to build it and to be proud of it and to show and be like, look, I'm not all talk. I did the thing. It's like, that's what I'm here for. That's
such a flex though. Like
absolutely.
And I'll be honest, like I feel like I don't do a good job of celebrating things. I think part of that is because a lot of what I do is a service, right? So it's like you don't always see the physical thing, but I notice that like when I do like merch or like when I make an ebook and then print it out, I'm like, whoa, like this was like, I had this idea in the shower, and then all of a sudden I'm like wearing this t-shirt. Like, I know that sounds so silly, and some people are going to be like, whoa, what are these two talking about? But it is so cool. And I think those are those moments that I'm like, I want to bottle this up because this is why I chose to take this path. As you just said, it's like, That was in my head. That literally was just like a random idea in my head, and now I'm holding it.
Literally. Ugh,
That's sick.
that it honestly, that's hot. That's
It's a flex. It's such a
that's what I live
flex.
for. That is what I live for. I think that's the perfect place to close. This has been so much fun, and I hope everybody listening also enjoyed it as much as I did, because this was I had the best time.
I honestly, I feel like we've just been like sitting over coffee and just like chatting and like even looking at
Yeah.
the time, I'm like, oh damn, like we've been chatting for a while,
It
but
was
like that's always a great sign. So thank you so much for
yeah,
having me. This has been awesome.
the perfect yap session.